Well, as you can probably see by the thumbnail and the title and stuff like that, and also by the mat here, I just got back from probably the last cup of the season, and what a way to end it, by winning with none other than Dragapult. There's a reason, I guess, why everybody's playing it and why it's the most played deck. It's pretty good. So the list specifically that I took today is the Utrecht winning list by, I think his name is Joa Wichner. This list specifically I really like, but I mean, firstly, let's get into it. 4 Dreepy, 4 Drakloak, and 3 Dragapults. I actually really like the 3 Dragapult line because obviously, one, you don't have to worry as much about prizing one, because back in the day, if you have like 2 of anything, like let's say 2 Gardevoirs as well, prizing one makes it very difficult to find them. And even though this deck does run a lot of searches to find these Dragapults, just having, like, if you have all 3 in the deck, your chances of just running into them as you just draw cards from, say, Recon Directive is a lot higher, which means that you don't have to spend a supporter trying to find Dragapults, and also you don't have to Ultra Ball, or if you're on item lock, you can't even Ultra Ball. So you're seeing Dragapults more often than not. You're not having to waste items or supporters getting these, and you can rather spend those on getting the much more valuable, arguably, tech cards. For example, Maractuses and Budews. So the Budews, of course, we already know you can buy some turns with Itchy Pollen, but the Maractus though, it essentially does the same function as Budew of buying you turns to set up, but in a different format or in a different way, right? Via retreat locking, which technically speaking is sometimes more powerful than an Itchy Pollen. You'll see later on why exactly, because some decks, Itchy Pollen doesn't really do much. They're not really that item reliant. Then we of course have Hawlucha. Being able to put 10 damage is very relevant because one, there's a lot of Pokemon that have 70 HP, so it lines up for a 60 from Phantom Dive to knockout, or Pokemon that have 210 HP, like Fezandipiti, can line up a knockout there. Or even in some very specific scenarios, if a Pokemon has 240 HP, Hawlucha combined with, say, a Munkidori or a Defiance Band can also get those KOs. Speaking of Munkidori, manipulating that damage across back to the board, Fezandipiti for your draw, Genesect turning off A-Specs can be very useful depending on the matchup. It's not always usable, but when it works, right? Then we have Latias. So initially Latias doesn't seem that amazing because you play rescue board as well, but Bloodmoon Ursaluna as well as Maractus both have some higher retreat costs, right? Maractus has 2, Bloodmoon has 3. Having Latias just means that you can more comfortably play these 2 cards without having to worry about switching out, right? And then of course the A-Spec of choice is Unfair Stamp for the hand disruption. There's a meme, you know, the moment they KO your Budew, you have a tear up, right? You go Fezandipiti for 3, Night Stretcher to get the Budew back or something, counter catch or something else, Unfair Stamp them, Dragapult bomb their board, and then how do they recover with just 2 cards in hand, right? Then for the supporters, we have 3 Brock Scouting. So of course, like I said, this is one option for you to get your Dragapult or even your Drakloaks, because it can get you 1 Evo Pokemon, or the fact that this can get you 2 basic Pokemon of any, like no Buddy-Buddy Poffin of 70 HP or less. This can get you your EXs, this can get you your high HP Pokemon, and they add to the hand, which is so incredibly important because now all of a sudden, let's say your Budew or whatever got knocked out, you can Brock Scouting to get your Fezandipiti plus also your Hawlucha, and these get added to the hand. So that means that you can use the Hawlucha to set up the 10 damage and also bench down Fezandipiti for 3. Or let's say later on, you can also grab Bloodmoon Ursaluna and Latias. That way you can bench down Bloodmoon Ursaluna to get ready for a KO on the following turn if you know you're going down to 2 prize cards left, and also bench down Latias so that there's not really a concern of them pulling this up into the active because you can always retreat it out. Or, you know, worst case scenario, if you're in the opening hand and you don't have an Arven, you don't have a Buddy-Buddy Poffin, this can just get you 2 Dreepies or something like that, right? And then we have 3 Boss's Orders, a lot of Gust, 4 Iono to keep up the theme of lots of hand disruption, and then 2 Jacqs. Ideally, you're using this for 2 Drakloaks, and then maybe later on another Drakloak and a Dragapult, and then 3 Arvens, because, you know, you can find your 3 counter catches, you can find one of your many tools and whatnot. For the energy, we play 3 Luminous, 2 Fire, and 2 Psychic. Pretty standard. Luminous is, of course, great for your Munkidoris, and having 3, we run into them pretty often. The other 4 regular energy you can find also by digging or with the 1 energy search that you'll see later on. And then what can we get from the Arven for tool cards? We have Rescue Board to, of course, help give a free pivot to something. Great on the Genesect. EXP Share to help chain our Dragapults. Bravery Charm to make Budew a little bit beefier so it doesn't instantly die to, say, a Munkidori or an opposing Phantom Dive. And then Defiance Band. Defiance Band on Dragapult is huge because 230 H or 230 damage from Phantom Dive becomes very relevant now, because now you can one-shot, say, Terapagos, you can one-shot Muse with Bravery Charm, and if you are behind on prizes and you manage to put down a Hawlucha, you can counter catch her up a Lily's Clefairy with a Bravery Charm, which they might think is safe, but now thanks to the 10 damage from Hawlucha, and then 230 with Defiance Band, you can now KO Lily's Clefairies out of nowhere. Then we played 2 Night Stretches, 1 Energy Surge, 3 Counter Catches, lots of Gust, remember, 3 Ultra Balls, and 4 Buddy-Buddy Poffins for some searching through the deck. But yeah, the list is very nice. You're drawing a lot of cards, and like I said, because you're probably getting your Dragapults naturally from your draws, when you have that turn, when you get KO'd or something, and you can have that explosive turn, you probably have a Dragapult already in hand, you probably have an Unfazed Stamp ready, you don't have to worry about using a Jacq or a Brock scouting to find Dragapult. That means that instead you can use Arven for say a Counter Catcher, or if you have Counter Catcher in hand already, which you probably do because we play 3 of them, so you've been seeing a lot of cards, you can use Brock scouting to get Fezandipiti plus a Hawlucha to set up those big turns, right, where you swing back and whatnot. It just means that you have so much possibilities once you have like that 10 card hand, and that's pretty much the MO of Dragapult. You want to set up behind your Budew, and then ideally either you can go in the offensive early enough. If you have everything set up, you can just boss something like say against Gardevoir, boss and double KO their 2 Curliers or the 2 Raltsers, or you just sit and wait and let them KO your Budew, let them activate Counter Catcher, and then you just unleash havoc on them. But let us get into the cup matches for today. There were effectively 6 matches that we played, but we'll get into the explanation of them as we go. Round 1, I went up against a Gardevoir player, playing sort of like the original Brent Tonneson 60, I think, with some minor adjustments. But I just smiled because I knew, oh, the one time I decided to play Dragapult is going up against the Gardevoir that I've been playing, you know, for who knows how long. But on the bright side though, coming back to what I said in my Durban SPE recap, this is kind of beneficial because obviously knowing your own deck is very nice, but if you know your opponent's deck as well, it makes the game feel so much nicer because now you know what all their outs are, you know what they're trying to dig for, you know how to deny them those outs as well. So game 1, you know, it was the classic sitting behind Budew and whatnot. I will say I did kind of get lucky in that my opponent did prize double Curlier. So while we were sitting behind Budew, he could effectively never evolve into Curlier, and he could never get into Gardevoir because we were Budew locking each other. And then eventually I was able to, you know, get the classic Dragapult. I take the aggression first by bossing up one of his Curliers, Munkidori or Hawlucha, and then just double KO both of the Raltsers. And then since he wasn't able to establish Gardevoir on the next turn, he just scooped and we went into game 2. Game 2 though, very similar. We just sit behind Budew every single time. And eventually though, we do break the lock and we do start swinging into each other. However, the issue with the Brent Tonneson 60, like I've been saying in the previous video, is that you sort of burn through a lot of cards, right? You have Professor's Research and you just dump everything and you play your 4 stretches to get everything back, right? But the issue is at some point I realized after we did do some trading, like he was on 4 prize cards left, I was also on 4, but I noticed that in his discard pile, he had used up all 4 of his Night Stretches and his Lily's Clefairy was in the discard pile. And at that point, I knew I am safe. There is nothing he can do to knock me out unless he gets Drifloon plus a Charm, but even then, I just return KO on the following turn, right? With no fear of Clefairy, that means I could just start swinging and take prize cards, and then that was a win of 2-0 against Gardevoir. Round 2, speaking of decks that I've played before, I go up against a terabox player. So, spoiler alert by the way, the entire tournament or the entire cup, I only played against terabox and Gardevoir, which is really funny to think that those are the last 2 decks that I played at the 2 SPEs. But again, it's great because that means I know these matchups. So game 1 against this terabox player, I of course go second, he goes first because he won the coin toss. This is when I realized how good the Maractus is in the deck. So I don't remember how exactly it worked, but I think I did try and Budew him on my turn, but I didn't have any hand disruption. So I knew that a Noctowl Torrential Pump was coming my way, and lo and behold, a Noctowl Torrential Pump did come my way. So he was down to 4 prize cards, but I think at this point I realized, hang on a second, if I can't disrupt him, you know, he probably has another Noctowl in hand, and even if I do Budew him somehow and get it back, stopping his Ultra Ball doesn't stop him from just, you know, having Noctowl in hand in general, or just having Crispin in hand and just doing it again, right? What is the best way that I can stop myself from getting Torrential Pumped again? The answer was Maractus. So I Counter Catcher up his Fan Rotom and I start using Corner on it because now he literally, again, because I know his deck, he doesn't play Switch. So yes, okay, you can use Ultra Ball to find a Noctowl or whatever, but then what? If you get a Noctowl, you are not getting off an attack this turn. The only way you can get off an attack is if you're able to get Wellspring Ogerpon into the active, which means that you'd have to Turo up his Fan Rotom, which means that you're not playing Crispin. If I just Budewed you here, Noctowl for Crispin Rescue Board would have given him the attack. So, Maractus for 20 damage. And also, I'm Counter Catchering up the Fan Rotom and not the Noctowl, which he had used earlier, because yes, although Fanrotom can attack back, I don't want to let him use Turo to refresh the Noctowl, right? Technically speaking, having Noctowl be played and on the board is the worst possible spot. If I knock it out, it means that Night Stretcher can give him another Jewel Seeker. If it's in the active and he Turos it back up, that means he gets another refresh of the Noctowl. So corner once for 20 damage, and then he does manage to find the Stadium plus energy, so he swings back to do 70 damage to Maractus. And so this is when I realize, hang on, I can set something up here. So I get down another Budew, and in my head I'm thinking, if I Maractus again, he'll be on 40 damage taken. If he then KOs my Maractus, I can put Budew in, and if I have a Defiance Band on this Budew, I can then KO the Fanrotom while item locking. But I do this in preparation, so I Defiance Band my Budew, and obviously all the while I'm slowly setting up my Dreepies and whatnot, my Dreepies and Drakloaks. But on the following turn, I realize, hang on, when he KOs my Maractus, it places 6 damage counters on the Fanrotom, which KOs it. So I do not need this Defiance Band on the Budew. And in fact, it's bad putting the Defiance Band on the Budew. You'll see why in just a second. But either way, he does decide to swing into the Maractus and get a knockout. So he goes down to 3, but because of the return KO, thanks to Maractus' ability, I go down to 5. And this is actually really good for Maractus, because the fact that he knocks out my Maractus, going into my turn, I get a prize card, so I'm on 5. It activates Fezandipiti. Countercatcher is still active, and Unfazed Stamp is now active. So thanks to all of this setup, I can now push up Drakloak, and because I've been drawing, like, you know, for the past 2 or 3 turns, thanks to what Maractus bought me, I can then go into Dragapult, I can Unfazed Stamp, I can put down a Hawlucha to put 10 damage onto a Wellspring Ogerpon, 10 damage onto the unevolved Hoothoot just yet, and he's only lost Hoothoot on the bench. Then I can Countercatcher up the Wellspring Ogerpon. I still have a supporter, so for example, if I didn't find the Hawlucha, I could have used an Arven to find it, I could have used anything to find it, but this is all supporterless, right? And I think I did put down, using Brock Scouting, Bloodmoon Ursaluna and a Latias, thanks to Area 0, to prepare myself for the following turn, right? Because now I go 200 onto the Wellspring Ogerpon, 60 onto the Lone Hoothoot. I take 3 prizes. I am now down to only 2 prize cards left. He still has 3, so if he does get Lily's Clefairy and knock out my Dragapult, he goes down to 1 prize card. Then whatever happens, I just return KO with Bloodmoon Ursaluna. Now, here is where I realized my mistake was very costly for attaching Defiance Band to this Budew. And that's because a 3 prize turn was on the table for him. Now granted, with no Noctowl evolution, and after getting Unfazed Stamped, it was going to be very difficult. He would have had to somehow get Mew plus Lily's Clefairy plus a Crispin plus like another energy onto it, right? Now, luck was on my side, and his Lily's Clefairy was prized though. So unfortunately, he wasn't able to get the return KO, and then on the following turn, I just pulled up something else again, and I smacked with Dragapult for another 2 prizes. So yeah, moral of the story, Maractus, pretty good. Game 2, unfortunately, he prized his Lily's Clefairy again, and there was a very funny turn where I think he, for once, didn't open Fanrotom. He had to use a Pikachu with a Sparkling Crystal and like fully charged Pikachu to knock out, I think, a Latias, because I unfortunately started Latias in the opening, so I did have a 2 prize on the board. But after he knocked out my Latias, I was able to get a 3 prize turn. It was a bit awkward though, because what I had to do was I had to Countercatcher up a Noctowl so that I could then put down Hawlucha, put 10 damage on a Hoothoot, 10 damage on the Pikachu, and then I bossed the Pikachu back up into the active. So technically speaking, I did waste 2 gusts for this, but for 3 prizes, I think it mattered, right? I think it would have been beneficial, because then I could just go for the Dragapult, knock out Pikachu, knock out one of the Hoothoots for 3 prizes. And then again, I think he couldn't really come back from that. And on the following turn, I was able to do another knockout on, like, say, a Mew plus 60 onto a Fanrotom, which I had somehow softened up with a single Budew attack, I think, on a previous turn, for the very nice prize line of 3-3. Round 3, I go up against another Guardi player, this time though, playing one of the new revised TM Evo Rabska Guardi lists, which was very interesting. Unfortunately though, in game 1, I think he prized both the Rabska and the Lily's Clefairy, but he only realized afterwards because he still benched down the Raylor. So when he TM Evo'd, he could only get the 2 Curliers. So there was like a 50 HP Raylor just sitting on the bench, not protecting anything, which meant that eventually I was able to just smack the active, knock out stuff on the bench, and he was struggling to find the Lily's Clefairy since it was prized. So he scooped and we went into game 2 very early. However, game 2 was a lot more concerning this time around because he did manage to get the turn 2 instant Evo into the Raylor or the Rabska plus Curlier. And the annoying thing about the Rabska is that I did eventually boss it into the active, but you sort of have to wait, quote unquote, waste a turn, knocking out the Rabska and only the Rabsca, which is just a single prize. You don't even get to set up the damage counters on that same turn, right? But it is important to knock out the Rabsca because setting up those damage counters is how you get the big prizes later on. And speaking of, I think that is a great lesson for Dragapult. Ideally, you don't want to take, 2-2-2 every now and then. You want to have like that terabox play where you go 3-3 or, I mean, even 2-4 even. You really want to set up for big swings in one go. And against this Gardy player now, I think, and just Gardy in general, you'll see a big reason why. And that is because I don't remember exactly how, but eventually he does manage to get out a Screamtail, not a Lily's Clefairy though, and even under the Budew lock, because of course he was able to TM Evo into Curlier and then evolve it manually into Gardevoir, he did start sniping down my Drakloaks. But again, the moment Dragapult goes behind, even if you don't take out the Budew, they took out a Drakloak like I said, it activates Counter Catcher, it activates Fezandipiti, it activates Unfair Stamp, it does so much. So on the return for that, I then pull up a Dragapult because I had noticed that in order to do that attack where he knocked out the Drakloak with his Screamtail, he did have to attach all 3 of his Psychic Energy from the discard to his Screamtail. So what I did was then I counter-catched up the Gardevoir, which in theory would be trapped because there's no energy in the discard for Psychic Embrace. Then I Unfair Stamped, of course, to put him down to 2 cards, and then I swung into his Gardevoir. Importantly, I did not KO the Screamtail because again, that frees up the energy. I put 2 damage counters on it though, so that would have 10 HP left, meaning that a Hawlucha is an easy KO, and then I also put some damage counters elsewhere on the board, like the Curlier and whatnot. At this point, I think he's down to 4 prize cards left, and I am on 5, because remember, I did have to knock out the Rabsca earlier on. And then here is where the Gardy player makes not really a big mistake, but something that I instantly notice and capitalize on. So on his turn, he benches down a Mew, which fills up his board, or fills up his bench, right? Because I think he has a Gardevoir in the active, and on the bench, I think of the 5 things, he now has a Mew, he had a Fezandipiti, a Munkidori, the Screamtail, which I had left, and I think another Gardevoir or a Curlier or something like that. But now that I know that his bench is full, he has no way to get down a Clefairy, unless he somehow gets a Turo, right? But upon seeing this, I know that I am golden. Now, I don't remember exactly what happened after this turn, but all I know is that on the following turns, I made sure that I never took a knockout to give him that chance for Lily's Clefairy, and I was trying to set up as best as possible, either for a big 5 prize turn, or to get to a position where I can take 3 prizes, and then even if he takes 2, I can then just, have the Bloodmoon KO at the end. And also, again, this entire time, I am making sure never to knock out that Screamtail because there was like 3 or 4 energy stuck on that thing. So for example, on the following turn, I pulled up the Fezandipiti. I smacked the Fezandipiti for 200 and, put more damage on the Mew. And then eventually, I do go down to 2 prize cards left when I go for a big swing, knocking out, say, the Fezandipiti, and then finally knocking out the Screamtail. Because I don't think I could have kept up not knocking anything out because he did have Munkidori to ping damage across. But when I was down to 2 prize cards left, I knew that I could put him in a checkmate position because I also had Bloodmoon Ursaluna on the bench. So, again, with Gardevoir, you never want to go down to 2 prize cards left against Dragapult because then Bloodmoon Boss Lily's Clefairy is always an option for an out. So what he did was very smart actually, and he did try and set up for a 4 prize turn by placing some damage counters on the Bloodmoon Ursaluna. The issue though is that we were on time. And this turn where he had tried to set up for a 4 prize turn was when his first turn, or like turn 0, right? So he only had 1 turn left after this, and I knew, again, this is why it's very helpful knowing the opponent's deck. The only way for him to get 4 prizes on the next turn is to, 1, get down the Clefairy, which he didn't have at the time, but get down Clefairy and somehow gust to make sure that he KOs this 2 prizer with, say, Munkidori, and then gust up like a Dragapult into the active. So what I did on my turn was I just put up a Budew and I just Itchy Pollened for 10 damage. And by doing that, I knew for a fact that because there's no boss's orders in that deck, there is no counter catcher, he can never get 4 prizes because this single prizer will always be in the active no matter what. And so game 2 of course did not come to a conclusion, but because I had won game 1, I won that match. Round 4, I go up against a terabox player, and I go up against none other than the terabox goat himself, Harper. And I know I said that it's very useful when you go up against a deck that you know. This was not a deck that I knew. It was terabox, but it was the upgraded version that Harper recently made a video about, where it has Pidgeot and a cheeky little 1/1 Dusk Noir line. So I will say that was the only loss I had, and it wasn't even close. Like his deck just absolutely demolished me. The one thing I will say was something that I completely never knew myself as a terabox player. But obviously turn 1 he gets set up, turn 2 what do? I try and Budew him, and I set up 2 Dreepies, and he did something that was very smart in my mind. So he of course energizes his water Ogerpon, and he's ready for the torrential pump, and then all he does is he snipes down the Budew, but just the Budew. He doesn't go for the, the 120 to the bench, which, when you think about that, you're like, oh, why are you taking 2 prizes? And I think, for most people, that is the thought, you just want to go 2-2-2. But in hindsight, that is incredibly smart by Harper. Because now, by not shuffling the energy back, the Wellspring Ogerpon still has that sniping capability on the next turn. And this is important because let's say he did snipe down a Dreepy here, and then let's say I Iono him or I Unfair Stamp him, and then it gives him a hand where he can't Crispin again, or he can't get off another attack. Then suddenly I have a lot of comfort to evolve him into a Drakloak, to attach an energy, and then hopefully on the next turn, if all it takes is 1 turn where you whiff the attack on Terabox. If he doesn't get that attack on the next turn, then on the following turn, this suddenly becomes a Dragapult, ready for an attack. Because he did not shuffle the energy, no matter what I do, like let's say I try to evolve, let's say I even evolve both of these Draklooks. Because I don't play a Crispin, I can only ever attach 1 energy per turn, of course, right? So even if I do manage to Budew him again, if I try and energize one of these Draklooks, that is when he'll go on the gas and then snipe both of them, setting me back another turn, which I think is just, very impressive. Round 5, I went up against another Gardy player, and this time it was the similar Brent Tonneson list. So once again, kind of similar results as round 1, where I try my best to not take KOs. I try my best to make it awkward for the Gardy player, right? Don't give them the bench space to put down Lily's Clefairy. Don't give them the chance to Fezandipiti to find the rare candies and whatnot. Let them energize Screamtail and gust around it and try and take out the Fez, making it awkward for them to get their energy to retreat out and stuff like that. And yeah, like that's just, typical Dragapult stuff. And then so after those, 5 rounds of Swiss, it was very funny. So there was a top 4. I was in first seed. Somebody else was in second. Well, duh. But the way it worked out is that of the top 4, 3rd place and 4th place, they were like not really playing for points. They had already maxed out on points. It was really whatever for them. It was really only between myself and the guy in second place, seeded. It was like, okay, we are the ones that can actually earn points here. So it was also like, we didn't want to go home late. So we just said, what if we just cut straight to the finals and have us 2 play? So like me and the 4th person player, the 4th player would just group to me, the 3rd place player would just give the win to the 2nd place player, and we just go straight to the finals. And that's what we did. So we just shortcut into the finals. And this person was playing Terabox, but like the simpler Terabox that I know, that I already beaten in round 2. And honestly, once again, the MVP of this match was once again Maractus. Like, yes, every single match started off the same way. He probably got off the torrential pump, took 2 prizes, but then I Maractus up his Fan Rotom, corner it for a few turns, which gives me a chance to set up. He then knocks out the Maractus with his Fan Rotom, and then I just rip the Unfair Stamp, Counter Catcher, Fezandipiti, go for the 3 prize turn with Hawlucha plus Dragapult. I go down to 2 prize cards left because remember, Maractus also returned KO's Fan Rotom. I put down the Bloodmoon Ursaluna to get ready for the Lily's Clefairy. I make sure not to bench down a Budew to give the possibility of a 3 prize turn. And then yeah, I just essentially, I go 3-3 both games. Or, technically speaking, 1-2 because of the Maractus. 1, 2, and then 3. Which again, now coming back to why I think Harper's list is so good, is because against both of these Terabox players, once I knock out that Noctowl, or once I knock out that one Hoothoot, that's the issue with Terabox or like say Raging Bolt. The Noctowls are great in that you can find 2 of whatever you want. But once you no longer have those Hootoots on the bench ready to evolve, you're living in top deck city essentially. That's why the Pidgeot seems really powerful in Harper's list. But yeah, that was the cup. And so I was able to walk away with this champion mat and a smile on my face and a new appreciation for Dragapult. Maybe all this time, I should have been playing Dragapult instead of trying out other shenanigans like Terabox or Gardevoir. Although then again, like I said, I do think a big advantage I had today was the fact that I did play against mostly Terabox and I did play against mostly Gardevoir, which are decks that I know of, right? And I think, again, that just goes back to saying how important it is to know not just your own deck, but to know your opponent's deck or the meta in general, to know how it's best to play around your opponent's win conditions and stuff like that. But yeah, it took a couple of months since I started playing, but I now finally have my own champion mat. And all it took was to play Dragapult. Who would have known, right? That's going to be it for this League Cup recap. Until next time, bye-bye.